Biden's nominee for the Supreme Court, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, is before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I haven't been following this testimony very closely. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of it tomorrow. But I wanted here to frame the broad issue that is under consideration here. And the broad issue is, does the Constitution matter at all? In other words, do we have a judge here that is going to make decisions according to and in conformity with the Constitution, yes or no? Now, there's been some talk on the part of the Biden administration and the left about a living constitution. And part of what I want to argue here is that there's no such thing as a living constitution. All constitutions are inherently dead, just like all laws are dead. Now, by dead, I don't mean that you can't change the law. The Constitution, in fact, can be amended. It's not easy to do it, but there is a process of amendment, and it's been done more than 20 times. But apart from the amendment process, the Constitution remains, you may say, inert, lifeless, and dead, in the same way that all laws need to be in order for them not only to be predictable, but also to mean something. I mean, think about it. What if somebody were to say, well, you know, we don't really have a speed limit, we have a living speed limit. What does that mean? Either there's a speed limit or there isn't. And if there is a speed limit, it's a specified number. And in this particular jurisdiction, at least while the law holds, you can't go over 65 or you can't go over 75, and that's what it is. And a judge can't say, well, in this particular situation, I thought it okay for this guy to go 90 because in my opinion, there was no real danger being posed on the highway. No, that's the law. And the Constitution isn't just a law, it is the supreme law. So the point I think here, the problem with Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is not this, we're not having some argument over how to read the Constitution. There are legitimate debates about how to read the Constitution. There were arguments, for example, over whether or not the Constitution sanctions a national bank. Jefferson and Hamilton disagreed about it. But what they didn't disagree about is that they had to consult the Constitution and its both explicit and implicit meanings in order to resolve their dispute. No one thought, well, this is just a living document. Well, you know what? It's obsolete the moment it was written. There's new knowledge that's comes in that enables us to make decisions, and we don't have to really rely on this antiquated document. So that's really where the problem is. The problem is whether Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is bound by the Constitution or not. And if she's not a judge, because a judge whose decisions are not based upon the text and the principles of the Constitution is not a judge, but an activist masquerading as a judge. Now, I think this is actually why she got the nomination. The left is actually very clear-eyed and ruthless about it. They just say, listen, when we want a judge, we want somebody who's going to vote our way all the time, at least on all critical issues. Republicans often will say, no, we want a judge who can do this and who can do that and who loves learning and who's, went to one of the top law schools and believes in the original meaning of the text and so on. The left doesn't care about any of that. They want votes on their side, and they've picked some. They were a little unsure about Michelle Childs. This is the other woman that both Lindsey Graham, as well as Jim Clyburn were pushing from South Carolina. But the problem with Michelle Childs was that they felt she might be too moderate. She may not side with them on some important issues. And so the progressives, who put a lot of money into these court fights, essentially vetoed her. And Biden, of course, mumblingly went along with that. That's how we got Judge Jackson. Now, interestingly, from the little I've seen of the hearing so far, it doesn't look to me that the Republicans have the appetite to really go after this woman, to really attack her in the same way that the left attacked Kavanaugh. And I think that as long as Republicans have this approach where sort of you sucker punch our nominees and we'll take the high road, the left is going to keep doing it. In other words, we're going to be getting more Kavanaughs because the left is able to bruise our nominees, even with fabricated allegations, and get away with it, at least get away with not having the kind of retaliation that they deserve. Now, This business about judicial activism, of just sort of leapfrogging over the Constitution, I think a lot of that was sanctified by the Brown decision going back to 1954. Essentially, the judges in the Brown decision, this was the decision, by the way, that overturned segregation. And so it's one of those kind of iconic decisions. But the judges made the mistake in that decision of basically saying that there's new social science evidence that shows that it's stigmatizing to blacks to be in segregated schools. And so we're going to make a decision not really based on the Constitution per se, but rather just based upon this kind of new pragmatic evidence that's come in, this new empirical data that's come in. And in that, they essentially cleared the way for future judges to start ignoring the Constitution. Of course, the most grotesque example of ignoring the Constitution, Roe versus Wade, a right to privacy that is nowhere specified in the Constitution. Well, yes, there's a Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure, but I think nobody would reasonably say that this right to unreasonable search and seizure applies to the womb. You can't unreasonably search and seize my womb. No, there was a kind of generic right to privacy that the judges themselves admitted came out of nowhere, or in their words, came out of, quote, penumbras in the Constitution. It's kind of sort of the idea that it's in there somewhere. We can't really find it, but so this is the issue. Do we want judges who are impartial? Do we want judges who are bound by the law? Do we want judges who play the role of, say, an umpire in a baseball game? Or do we want judges who are activists, judges who are playing on one team instead of the other? And in that sense, what we find is that these people, although they wear judicial robes and they have the name judge in front of their name, they're not real judges. They're essentially impersonators who are pretending to be judges.